Hey traders, welcome back to the weekly Forex Forecast. We've seen the dollar rallying over the last 5 weeks, and what this tells us is this is looking like an impulsive move. It's pointing towards risk off. And when we look at the stock market itself, we do have small caps once again underperforming. But this time, unlike when we got the bear market rally previously in the equity market, the generals, the leadership of the stock market, Apple, Meta, they are not rallying. They are not coming in to save the stock market. They are in fact confirming the sell-off now in small caps, and this risk-off sentiment should continue to spill over into Forex markets, and it's why on my watch list I do favor risk-off setups heading into next week once again. Okay, so a very quick look at the economic calendar because there is pretty much nothing we need to pay attention to in terms of short-term trading next week. We have a clear run at the markets. The only thing next week is the Jackson Hole Symposium on Friday, but for short-term trades, we can very easily be out of those by the time this rolls around on Friday. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the scores for the coming week. And last week, the pound pairs were highlighted as the best market to look for to the upside. We did also have the Swiss franc, but the pound pairs really outperformed last week, and these were setups highlighted in last week's video. So if you got involved in those intra-week, they rallied really nicely into their upper bounds. And I'm going to show you in today's video why I do like the pound pairs, but I think they need to pull back a little bit first. So the pound is once again the top long going into this week versus the New Zealand, the yen and the Aussie. Again, we had big moves in this last week, so I do think we're going to correct first. But I like pound Aussie, pound yen, pound New Zealand, as we're going to see in today's video first and foremost. We're then going to look at the dollar pairs because the dollar has increased its score. It now moves +2 for the first time in a long time. And what this is telling us is at the same time the euro is weakening in the scorecards, the dollar has real momentum, and I do think we're going to see the dollar continue higher over the next month or so as well. So coming into this week, Aussie dollar to the downside is what we're going to be looking at, US dollar yen to the upside, New Zealand dollar to the downside. And finally, we're going to look at the franc pairs once again. And you can see all of these markets have a risk-off tilt. The pound, the franc, and the dollar versus the Aussie, the yen, and the New Zealand are all risk-off apart from the yen pairs. So the yen pairs, the yen is the most risk-off currency. So ideally, if you start to see real risk-off coming into the markets, you can favor these commodity currencies, the New Zealand, the Aussie, versus the pound, the franc, and the dollar. But what we're seeing at the moment, as long as the markets don't start to crash, which there's no sign of that happening yet in the equity markets, yes, a sell-off, yes, a correction, but there's nothing in the data to suggest a crash is imminent in equities. So that should keep the yen suppressed as well. So going into next week, those are the 6 currencies we're going to be focused on in today's video. Okay, so let's have a brief look at the individual currencies before moving on to the markets themselves. Starting with the dollar, we did discuss in previous videos how we tested the 2015 breakout high here, and it was such a steep sell-off that this looked like a capitulation bottom in the dollar, and we've rallied for the previous 5 weeks. Since then, as I said earlier in the video, we've erased 2/3 of the yearly sell-off. So I do once again like the dollar, and now we're above the 2-year breakout. We're coming for the 7-year breakout, and I do think we break above here, and we're going to be coming back to the 105.88 in fairly short order over the next couple of months, in my opinion. Next is the euro. The euro, just the opposite of what we've discussed here in the dollar, and you can see the previous low over here is all the way down at the 1.06710. So again, I do think we're going to be coming down testing this level fairly soon. The euro itself has weakened in the scorecard, so going into this week, I do not like this really either to the upside or the downside. If we're looking at euro dollar, which we do every single week, however, I would favor euro dollar to the downside, and this was actually a market that performed to the downside last week. Next is the pound. Now, ever since we had the flash crash, we've just rallied in this market, and we are still above the major breakout level in the pound. So actually going into this week, I do once again favor the pound on a relative basis, but I do think as we start to see the macro deteriorate globally, and we're already seeing issues coming out of China, I do think we're going to see a bid in the dollar, back towards the highs, and I do think the pound is going to be coming down, not just to this low, but potentially even to this low in a kind of more risk-off environment. But as it currently stands, it's actually a good long play still, as it has been all year and has been highlighting the scorecard. So I do favor pound longs once again next week. Next is the Swiss franc. We traded into the major target highlighted on January the 1st. I did highlight this, and this move was actually a fantastic move so far this year. We are starting to sell off, but this is overall, as it currently stands, just looks like a big bull flag, and I do think we're going to come out, retest the highs and maybe higher over the back end of this year. Going into next week, It is showing some weakness technically, but relatively speaking, I still like it versus the Aussie, the New Zealand, and even the yen. Next is Japanese yen, and I have highlighted this to the downside, and I think we're coming down to this prior low. And until we take out this prior low, we're probably going to see this kind of stagflationary high for longer environment. Once we take out this low and we start to potentially see a bottom in the yen, and at the same time we take out the low in TLT in the bond market, this is when we could start to see the recessionary trade taking over and that flight to safety and risk off. As it currently stands, these are really higher for longer risk off setups, not recessionary setups just yet. So I do like the yen once again, and unless or until we come down, take out this low, I think yen is going to be good on the short side. Next is the Canadian dollar. It has been holding up fairly well because of a stronger crude oil recently, but you can see it selling off and it is likely to come down to the low. So I think there are better shorts going into next week. However, I do, if you are trading the CAD pairs, which we haven't really got here, but if you are trading these, it would be to the downside, and I think we are now making our way back down towards this low over the next 8 weeks or so. Next is the Aussie. I've been highlighting this to the downside all year in these videos, not just to here, but potentially down to here. If we get, and as I believe is going to be the case, over the back end of this year, Q4, even maybe Q3, but Q4, Q1, we're going to start to see a more recessionary regime take over. And this is likely to, first port of call, bring the Aussie down to here. So even if we're not focused on this yet, the big move here is from here down into this area. This is going to play out nicely to the short side in all probability. And once we take out this low, if we break with momentum, then we can start looking down to here. And finally, the New Zealand dollar, another market I've been highlighting to the downside all year. And although it's been choppy and taking its time, we have now started to break out. So we should be looking for this move, not just next week, but over the back end of this year, Q3, Q4, because this is going to pay nicely to the downside in all probability. And it's why, even though you could look at CAD shorts, I do favor New Zealand and Aussie shorts instead of CAD shorts heading into next week. Okay, so let's have a look at the markets this week, starting with crude oil. Last week, this was a market highlighted to the upside. I said to you in last week's video, I can either buy crude oil or do nothing. Shorting this market is not an option. And I highlighted the 79 to 80 area. And actually, this was a market I traded personally last week. I bought it in this area and I did exit up in this area. And this was a nice short-term trade. There was a little bit of money left on the table from me. I could have actually got a bit more out of this. But this is exactly what I'm looking for when I say to you guys, you know, if we pull back into the lower bound here, we're looking for a short-term bounce. So coming into this week, once again, I can either be long or do nothing. This is not one of my favorite setups heading into next week. I do think there are better markets highlighted in gold, but on balance, I still favor long positions. So any pullback in this market next week is viewed as an opportunity to look for a breakout, and arguably we're already doing that. So if we get some momentum, you know, if we break out down in this area, I am going to be looking for a consolidation and then any move up into the previous high and into the 84.50. And as usual, if we start to just pull back, say we pull back from the open and we just trade very much like last week. Look how we just trended down last week into the lower bound and then we bounced. If we do that again this week into the 77.50, this would be the second place I'd be looking for a short-term buy opportunity in crude oil. Next is pound New Zealand. Now this was a market highlighted in last week's video as one of the best markets to the upside, these pound pairs. And look at this move right into the max profit taking zone here. And that's exactly where we finished the week. So really nice move in this market from last week's video. Coming into this week, because we've had such an extended move, I do think there's a good chance we pull back into this area here, the 2.12, and this might be the place we can start to look for buy opportunities in the pound pairs. So just as we had the rally, I wouldn't be surprised to see a pullback. But any pullback, I'm going to be reactive. Any pullback and a breakout intra-week would set up the opportunity to look for long positions once again into the 2.1750. And if we trade all the way back into the 2.12, this is the second place I'd be looking for a short-term buy opportunity in pound New Zealand next week. Next is pound yen, another market highlighted to the upside in last week's video. And look at this, we tested the 186.50 zone from last week's video, and that was absolutely almost to the pip. That was the high. And if you had booked your profits as you started to trade into this, that would have been pretty much the most you could have got out of this market last week. So another really nice market from last week's video. Coming into this week, we've already started to correct. So any continued correction, I'm going to be looking first and foremost for a breakout in the direction of this setup into the 188 area. And if we pull all the way back, very similar to what we just looked at in crude oil, into the 182. This is the second place next week. I'd be looking for a short-term bounce in pound yen. And the final pound pair is pound Aussie, another market highlighted from last week's video, and we blasted through the max profit taking zone. We actually just consolidated above it. So another very good market from last week's video. Coming into this week, any pullback, and I do need a pullback first, is viewed as the opportunity to start to look for intra-week breakouts into the 2.0120. And if we just pull all the way back, and we start to test these highs especially, this would be a nice area over here. If we start to pull back and we pull into the 1.960, this is the second place next week. I'd be looking for a near-term buying opportunity in pound Aussie. Moving on to the dollar pairs, starting with New Zealand dollar. I like this the best out of the dollar pairs because of the weakness in the scorecards for the New Zealand. It's been kind of choppy, so any pullback in this market is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish breakouts in the downward direction towards the 0.5820. And of course, if we pull all the way back and we retest the 0.6020, maybe even we pop through and we test this low, this would be the second place next week. I'd be looking for a near-term short opportunity in New Zealand dollar. Next is US dollar yen, already started to correct, so any continued consolidation, look for this breakout. Very similar to this. Very similar to this. Looking for a breakout in the direction of this market into the 14750. And if we just continue all the way back, very much like crude oil, we test the 14350. This is the second place next week. Anywhere else, if we're just in here, I'm not going to be looking for opportunities. Either we break out, and I'm looking for an opportunity after the breakout, or we don't break out before we test the 14350, and this is the second area for a short-term buying opportunity that I'm going to be looking for. Next is Aussie dollar. This was a market highlighted in last week's video, and look how nicely this moved last week. We broke out, we pulled back, and we started to broke out, pull back, and we sold off right into the max profit taking zone. And that was what held the bottom in this market last week. That was pretty much the entire move in last week's Aussie dollar market. Coming into this week, any pullback, and I would like to see a pullback first. It could be a shallow one, could be a deep one, but I'd like to see a consolidation or a pullback, is viewed as the opportunity to look for bearish breakouts. You have to forgive my bendy trend line here, but any breakout in this direction is an opportunity to the short side into the 0.6300. Or if we continue to pull back and we test these lows over here, this kind of area is a very good area here. We tested it already here. This would be the second place next week. I would look for a potential short opportunity in Aussie dollar. And the final dollar pair is euro dollar. I prefer these markets because the Aussie, the yen, and the New Zealand are all weaker in the scorecards. However, the euro has actually started to move. It's got some negative momentum in the scorecards, whereas the dollar has positive ones. So I am interested in shorts in euro dollar based on that next week. In last week's video, I highlighted the 1.0840 area, and look at this move. We tested this, and that was pretty much the entire move for the week, and we bounced from this area. Any pullback next week is viewed, because we're quite near the lows here, so any pullback first is needed, and that is going to be the opportunity to look for a breakout to the downside in euro dollar into the 1.0760. If we come and test this area, this would be a max profit taking zone. But if we pull back into the 1.0980 area, this is the second place. I'd be looking for a short-term sell opportunity in euro dollar next week. I cannot buy euro dollar next week and either short it or do nothing, and these are the two places I'll be looking at doing that potentially next week on a reactive basis. And finally, we have the franc pairs back in the weekly Forex Forecast video this week. We're starting to pull back already, so any consolidation is viewed as the opportunity to look for bearish breakouts. I can either be short New Zealand franc or do nothing next week into the 0.5160. And if we pull back into these previous lows over here and we test the 0.530, this is the second place next week on a pullback, so a breakout or a pullback. This is the second place on a pullback. I'd be looking for a potential short in New Zealand franc next week. Next is franc yen. I can either buy this or do nothing next week. Selling this market's not an option for me, and we've already pulled back quite nicely. So I'm going to look for a potential breakout intra-week in this market into the previous high and then into the 167 area. And if we continue to break lower into the 16250, this is the second place next week for a kind of buy the dip opportunity. I'd be looking for a near-term buying opportunity in franc yen. And the final franc pair is Aussie franc. Any continued pullback is viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish breakouts in the direction of the scorecards into the 0.5580. And of course, if we pull all the way back and we retest the 0.5720 area, this is the second place on a pullback. I'd be looking for a potential short in Aussie franc. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold, silver, and Bitcoin, starting with gold and silver, and all three of these, in fact, I do still like shorts once again this week, all highlighted as potential shorts in last week's video. Any pullback, bear in mind as well, the dollar is now a headwind for gold and silver, especially moving to +2 for the first time. +2 in the scorecards tells us we have substantial edge trading dollar to the long side. So any pullback in gold is viewed as the opportunity to look for a bearish breakout down to the 1855 area, and if we pull back into the 1925 area, and you can see there's a low over here retested here, tried to break through, pull back, retested here. So if we pull back into this area, this is going to be the second place I'd look for a potential short opportunity next week in gold. Next is silver. Now I do slightly favor gold shorts over silver. Silver is actually quite corrective here, as you can see, but I do on balance favor shorts in silver too. So any pullback is viewed as the opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals in this market down to the 22 handle. And if we pull back and we retest the 2350 area, this is the second place I'd be looking for a potential short in silver next week. And finally, we have Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin was highlighted as an opportunity to the downside in last week's video. I was looking for potential shorts, and look at this big sell-off we had. But because we're starting to see risk off coming into the equity markets and also the Forex complex, this is now playing through into the crypto markets. And I do favor shorts once again. And look at how strongly this broke through the lower bound. This implies further downside heading into this week. So coming into this week, any pullback in Bitcoin would be viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts and breakouts during the week down towards the 24,000 area. And if we pull back and we retest the 27,500, this is the second place I'd be looking for a potential short in Bitcoin on this kind of, it's actually setting up as a nice bear flag, this kind of sell the rip up at the 27,500 area for a short-term sell opportunity in Bitcoin. So that is it for me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the room each day where I go through these markets and the setups that I'm personally looking at with members on a daily basis for over 75 markets in different asset classes, including stocks, bonds, Forex, and commodities.